We have a very young panelist, young girl, Miss Ujjwala Uppuluri, student in National University of Juridical Sciences, of course, this campus only. She will give a talk on the library's exception, what the amended Copyright Act does and should do for sharing and preserving knowledge in the digital era. Thank you.
So I'm afraid that
20 minutes.
Yes. I'm afraid that this is going to be considerably less contentious than Amlan's presentation. But so to first explain what the intention behind writing this paper is. While we talk about publishers on the one hand and the end user, the reader, the recipient of whatever content is created on the other, very often we're not looking too closely at the intermediary in that supply chain of knowledge. And this, and with now the amendment in the 2012 Act, I think it gives you good grounds on which to reflect on how far it is that copyright is able to address how libraries function and what it is that these legal regimes should be doing with respect to facilitating the library's societal function. So if I could begin with an outline of what I'll be doing over the course of the next 20 minutes. I'll start with discussing what public libraries are and how it is that we should view them for the purposes of my analysis that will follow. Then I will discuss the changes brought about in the amendment that could potentially affect libraries. And finally, this will be a little less structured. It will be some concerns that should occupy our attention now with regard to the future of libraries. And this is particularly with regards to what's happening elsewhere in the world with libraries. Just to caveat this right now, it's going to be more prescriptive, sometimes even speculative. It's not going to be particularly contentious or case-based. If I can start with the preliminary point on the normatives, and we've discussed that just now with the tension between what it is that Amlan wants and what it is that we want otherwise as, for instance, authors or people that don't see the end of increasing access as an especially logical one. I'm afraid that everything that I'll argue now is going to be premised on that normative, so just to clarify now. So the access to knowledge movement is essentially based in the idea of knowledge being some kind of a public good, which is to say that it's it's non-rival, it's non-excludable, and as a result, we're interested in maximizing the exchange of content and in maximizing the creation of content as well. Now, with that and distributive justice being the end to which libraries have worked consistently with regard to how states view their function, there is a real necessity for us to look at them carefully and to legislate carefully, even if a lot of what I will say will be changes that may not necessarily kick in, which would be relevant only in the future. On the law governing public libraries in India now, there's been a host of legislation at the state level governing public libraries. Most of these simply institute a government-run public library at the state. The earliest one was something in 1945 in Kolhapur, but of what exists now, it is 1948, the Tamil Nadu Act instituting the Madras Public Library. And the latest ones that we have are in the younger states, of course, Arunachal and the like. There's another law that I'd like to draw your attention to now, and it's the law that governs depositories. Depositories are essentially libraries which will receive copies of every book published in the jurisdiction in which the law operates. We have 4 deposit libraries. One is right here in Calcutta, the National Library. One is in Chennai, another in Mumbai, and the last in Delhi. To move then to the specific changes that that amendment brings about. First, there is Section 14C1A, capital A, which provides that the reproduction right will include storing of works in any medium by electronic means. Then there is Section 52(1). There are two provisions that we're concerned with there, but to the larger extent what we're concerned with is 52(1)(n). That provides that storage of a work in electronic means by what it terms a non-commercial public library, and I'd like you all to take note of this phrase. For the purposes of preservation is permissible where the library possesses an analog copy of that work already. This is obviously a positive step because they recognize the preservation function that libraries serve. But as I'll show, there is some ambiguity that this section raises as well. There is next, third, Section 2(1)(fa), which defines the term commercial rental. It does so negatively to exclude lending by non-profit libraries. That's the terminology used here as opposed to under 52(1). Or by non-profit educational institutions. The explanation, of course, defines what it is that a non-profit library is, and that's the only instance of a qualifying term to the word library in the Act being defined. Fourth, there is the replacement throughout the Act of hire with commercial rental. But there is one notable instance of omission to make this substitution, and that occurs in Section 51. I'm presuming that the omission was deliberate, and working on that presumption, I think that there's two reasons that that we could look at for why this change was brought about. The first, I think, is the simpler one, is to bring the law in conformity with the WIPO copyright treaty and similar instruments. Then there is, as to the omission, the intention obviously to retain the breadth of the infringement section under Section 51. Now that's not necessarily something libraries are too happy about, but I think that it is a valid justification for reconciling this omission. Finally, I think that there is a problem with the use of, as I've already flagged off, the term library. Across the Act, we're seeing different qualifiers attached to it, which means essentially that under 52 there are different standards for different rights, there are different standards for different institutions to access 52's provisions. So the first is 2(1)(fa) is reference to a non-profit library. Then there's 52(1)(n's reference to a non-commercial public library. There's 52(1)(o), which refers to the same term. Then there are 52(1)(p) and (zb), which refers simply to libraries without qualification. I'm inclined to argue that the lack of clarity here is problematic for libraries, not only because we don't know what a library is, and I'll explain to you why that has been a problem elsewhere, but also because of this difference in standards that would apply across these sub-provisions. So then these are the notable changes that I was able to catalog on looking at the amendment. Moving then to the final chunk of my presentation, I'll keep it very short. First, I'd like to refer to the digitization project that most libraries across the world are beginning to either take note of or institute. By April 2013, we know that the Digital Public Library of America will be kicked off. Europe has a similar program that it is talking about. So just to clarify, it's not only the preservation function that the libraries perform. I've referred to the commercial rental exception with the intent of flagging off that it is possible for rental and lending to occur where it is undertaken by a non-profit library as opposed to a non-commercial library, the difference between which were not very clear. But to get back, the preservation function, there is a lot of material to suggest that preservation, of course, is best achieved digitally. And to that extent, while notwithstanding the significant outlays towards public libraries that we see in our 5-year plans, the time may not be ripe for us to consider this. It should nevertheless be something that our legislation accounts for. The digital DPLA has been inhibited on several counts, with opening in 2013 with a broad sort of digitization aim because of the things that we have seen go wrong with the Google Books settlement. There is, of course, the experience with fair use there, and the experience with, particularly with scanning and storing large volumes of content. There is also the concern with regard to orphan works. There is also the length of copyright terms in general that they have consistently referred to as being an inhibitory factor. I think that this is especially important to note with respect to the deposit libraries that we have, and to account for this in our law, notwithstanding that it's not a point of contention yet. The next is the need for us to clarify what a library is, that I've already referred to. So, for instance, Project Gutenberg, which all of us, and especially the students in this room, would be familiar with, obtains a copyright clearance before it puts up any work on online. It does so because it's not clear whether or not it amounts to a library for the purpose of receiving protection under the copyright structure. The reason that they're ambiguous as to this point is because of the fact that there is no, the fact that it's an entirely virtual library, that it's not grounded in physical copies or in a physical structure. We know that this may not be that much of a problem here, because when we look at 52, it makes reference to all digital copies. However, because the term library is not defined, there could be what I saw in Amlan's presentation, which is copyright self-censorship, which is something that we would have to worry about in taking up projects like this. Finally, and I think that this is perhaps the vaguest of all my vague observations about public libraries and copyright. The Library of Congress in the United States has begun to discuss in very, very strong terms the untenability of continuing to work with Section 108 of the US law, because it is premised on physical copies as being a requirement before you can access 52 type provisions. So 52 for us as well, this provision as to preservation that I referred to, refers to the requirement of there being a physical copy that has been purchased prior to making the electronic copy in whatever medium. And I think that this is a valid concern because it could affect, and there is a lot of material to suggest that that again is something that is an inhibitory concern with digitization projects already. It could affect how it is that we view reproduction and distribution rights. And it would be a problem for us to resolve now, both in practical terms, to see whether it is practically tenable, whatever structure we come up with, presuming that the present structure under 108 or under our law is untenable. And to also look at whether or not we're normatively satisfied with this concern. And I can see that that will raise a large number of concerns with publishers and perhaps even end users. Finally, then, I'll turn over to questions. This has been, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Ujjwala. And you have covered all the issues satisfactorily. Even I personally feel that as a student of library information science, that I'm not satisfied with the few provisions. It should have been more provisions for limitation exception for libraries. For example, we don't have any express provision for interlibrary loan, especially in digital and movement of not only physical copies, the digital copy is also important. If you look at the Kenneth Cruz, the seminal study which he has done for the Library and Archives limitation exception for the WIPO, studied about 149 countries, and says out of 149, 21 countries don't have exception limitation for libraries. The interlibrary loan, only 6 countries have given express exceptions. If something is not given expressly, intelligent lawyers like Abhishek can present the matter in a different way, and then like Delhi photocopy course package, the National Library in Calcutta, librarian may run into problem. So that is the issue, and also the way people interpret the public library is very wrongly. The Delivery Books and Newspaper Act 1954, which talks about the compulsory deposit of the books published in 4 public libraries, which are enumerated. It doesn't mean that those are only 4 public libraries. Any public library funded by the government, including the Punjabi Library, is a public library managed and run by the government. And we have another treaty being discussed in the WIPO, that is limitation and exceptions for library and archives. All these issues are being addressed there, and the topics, 13 major topics, including issues like reproduction, translation, parallel imports and preservation. All the issues are being discussed there. Let us throw open question to Professor NSG.
It's just a clarification. I want to add to what she has said in the context of amendment. We do not have a rental right as far as books are concerned, literary, dramatic, musical, artistic work.
Yes.
The mandate is not based upon WIPO treaty but based upon TRIPS agreement. TRIPS mandate commercial rental rights for mandatorily for computer programs and flexibility for cinematograph films. And when we move on to sound records and performers' rights, we still have some flexibilities there because they have linked it. What happened was the amendment in 1992 where they used the word hire rather than rental, commercial rental, probably because it was an amendment before TRIPS in many cases. But when we are relooking into making it TRIPS compliant, we realize that hire can create problem, which can even go for lending, and lending be covered under commercial rentals. And that was never the intention of the international community, because the literature makes it very clear that this is only for commercial rental. And that's the reason why when you look at the amendment, we mentioned about computer program, sound recording, films, performance right and broadcasting rather than getting into books. So when you look at really library, what we are addressing is a totally different set of issues. Which
if I can just clarify, to the extent, so the one thing that I didn't do when I set out my normatives is to tell you that we're concerned with all kinds of content. And I think that to that extent, the commercial rental right and the exception for non-profit libraries is relevant to us here.
Right. What I'm telling you is what the law has addressed. What I was trying to tell on that. Because we do not have a right under Section 14, Clause 1. The second issue is on what we did on libraries was also interesting. Because as rightly said by Rakhavendra, we have not looked library, let's say 20 years ahead, what is going to happen. And as a virtual library, and what type of provisions we require to facilitate virtual library. That's a different type of balance we need to address. The limited amendment we made is to a large extent preservation. That's where you have a hard copy, you can convert into soft copy. But then there is a lot of issues left out with reference to its use. Can you create a website and keep it all on the website and allow people to use? Will really create problem, but it's a question needs to be addressed at a different end. As you see it, when you look at library from 10 years or 20 years down the line, we need to have revisit on how to build a proper balance.
Especially lending
digital copies. No, because then the issue of lending totally changes. How will you regulate people traveling to a virtual library? You have a definite balance when you go to a library with 2 or 3 copies, which we have seen. But in a virtual library context, 2,000, 4,000, 10,000, 20,000 people can at a stretch access to one copy which you preserved.
Yes,
This is a different set of balance we need to build. it's a larger set of questions which we need to address to find out the right balance.
Indeed, I'm not suggesting that it was the mandate of this amendment to fully address libraries and the future of libraries, merely that it is a good time now to start discussing how it is, yes, that we will proceed when the time comes.
Yeah, the last question from Pranish.
I tend to agree with you that there's a problem with the way 52(1)(n) is phrased. The idea that you have to have a physical copy of the work and the fact that it says for preservation, and that's limited. However, I had in a brief observation in another post of mine said libraries might be able to use this in conjunction with the fact that under Section 14 of the Copyright Act, lending rights of authors is limited to commercial rental, and I'm specifically talking about non-artistic, non-literary, etc., which also I will have a duty to cover.
Yes.
Okay, and in conjunction with Section 51B, which covers lending of infringing copies, right? Argue that they can legally scan and lend electronic copies of works in the same manner that lend physical copies. Now, something like Open Library, for instance, has a limitation. If one person has borrowed it, then until that is nominally returned, another person can't borrow that electronic
copy. Yes.
Okay, so there can be those kinds of limitations potentially. Okay, but that's a possible interpretation. I'm not very confident about that interpretation, but one possibility that I think might be good to explore. The other thing you might want to explore in your paper is different public libraries acts.
Yeah.
At least 13 different such acts across different states, and potentially more. And
the model act as well of,
And you might want to see what role those can play, specifically with electronic copies and the interaction between those acts and the Copyright Act. I think that's a very rich area that no one has really addressed in India, and that would be good.
Thank you, Mr. Pranish. Honorable Prime Minister announced the National Library Mission recently. Under this mission, the Culture Ministry has formed a interministerial group of meeting, and then about more than 4,000 village libraries electronically will be linked, and the more digital environment created in lending of the books and access of information especially, and then these things will be addressed soon. And also there is a need for introduction of this kind of library act in all states and union territories, and revising the existing acts to address the present day environment. And then I request you to give a big hand to Ms. Ujjwala. And
if I could just before that respond to you. So the reason that so I do understand that a lot of the things here are possibly even pedantic, but I think that the point to stress is that we want, so I do agree that that's a possible interpretation that you mentioned in your blog post, Pranish. The reason that I'm reluctant to agree that that's the line to go is that I want to see certainty in this law, because we're concerned with compliance by a historically non-legal community in India. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Ujjwala.